Shift Left, Accessibility User Research with Prototypes, presented by Leona Zumbo and Ruth Herr, AliCab 2021. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor How2.
Hi, I'm Leona. I'm a Senior Specialist for the Accessibility team at Telstra.
And I'm Ruth Herr. I'm a UX researcher at Telstra, and we've been working together on developing methods for accessible user testing. About a year ago, Leona and I set up a regular cadence of user testing on Telstra's key digital assets with people with disability. We test our live sites and apps, and through this process, we've identified many accessibility defects and usability improvements. But we wanted to expand our practices to be more inclusive and test not just our live sites, but throughout our design process. This fits in with the concept of shift left, moving accessibility efforts earlier in software development, which not only has efficiency benefits, but will mean we're also more able to design optimal accessible experiences. One of the main types of research that we do in design is user testing on clickable prototypes. The prototypes emulate web or app screens, and we use them in user testing sessions to demonstrate potential designs to participants. We give scenarios and ask the participants to complete tasks using the prototypes, and we gather feedback, which we then use to improve our designs. The clickable prototypes are quite simple, effectively a series of images of screens with hotspots linking them. And while they may look like a web or an app screen, there's no underlying code, so they're not accessible to screen readers. We wanted to find alternatives that we could use instead of these clickable prototypes, that we could get feedback from our designs with people who are blind. We identified the potential to use tactile diagrams supported with audio descriptions, what we call tactile prototypes, as an alternative to these clickable prototypes. We worked with an existing project to redesign Telstra Search to trial this method, and we're going to share how we ran this testing and our initial findings. We're hoping that this will be the first in a series of tools and methodologies that can be used at different stages of design to make research more inclusive. So now Leona is going to talk through these tactile designs.
So what is a tactile diagram? Well, essentially, it's a diagram that uses raised surfaces and distinct patterns to translate a visual image into a textured one. And these types of images are not exact reproductions of visual images, but are used to illustrate the important concepts that are conveyed. Tactile diagrams are used in works of art, in maps, graphs, architectural and three-dimensional objects or spaces. On the left, we can see there's a screenshot of a page from the search prototype, and on the right, we have a schematic. We selected 4 main screens in the redesign journey and engaged Vision Australia to produce diagrams of those user interfaces. The tactile diagrams were designed in Corel Draw. The software was used to create a simplified page, which only contained elements important to the interaction, and labels were added in Braille. Different textures for different types of elements were added, and a separate key was created. You can see here an example of the artifact. On the left is the key, and on the right is the first page in the search journey. The diagrams themselves were printed on swell paper and then heated in a PAF machine. The heat puffs the paper where there's black ink, creating those raised lines. To help people interact and interpret the tactile diagrams, we supported the artifacts with audio description. So we had to figure out the best way to describe a user interface. And there are several ways to describe objects or scenes. For example, if you were describing parts of an ATM or kiosk, you might do so in a clockwise direction. Or if you were describing a landscape, you might choose to do that from the foreground right through to the background. However, when describing a page, it's best to describe it from left to right, top to bottom, similar to how a person might read a page of text or Braille. We set a boundary for the components that we were about to describe. So for example, we said there is a raised border running parallel to all 4 sides of the page. We didn't bother describing the key, as its purpose was to give participants that context if they wanted to go through and feel the artifacts, the tactile diagrams, before we ran each session. We described consistent functionality like navigation once, and then we referred to it as its own component on the subsequent screens. In the same way, we described textures assigned to each element the first time the participant moves through these items on the page. So for example, we described the vertical lines on navigation buttons and the dashed lines for links. We also described elements using screen reader terminology. So for example, the word combo box resonated with participants to identify the auto-suggest search field. Now we're going to play you an example from the testing.
Here we go. The boundary of the screen is indicated by a rectangle which runs parallel to all 4 sides of the page. We will be describing the elements within this boundary from left to right and top to bottom. In the top left-hand corner of the screen, there's a Telstra logo indicated by a raised T. This is the home link. Directly to the right are a group of 3 rectangular menu buttons. These takes you to Telstra Personal types of content. The second button takes you to Telstra Business type of content, and then the last one takes you to Enterprise type web pages. Further to the right is another group of 3 buttons. The first has like a dot texture, and that's the Telstra Plus button. The next is the Help menu button, and the last is the Search button, and that has the raised search icon within it. Further along to the right, enclosed within its own border, is the Sign In button, and it has this kind of cross-hatch texture to it. Taken all together, these 8 items make up the global navigation, and they're the same on each of the screens.
So to run the testing sessions, first of all, we sent the tactile prototypes in the form of a booklet out in advance to all of the participants. We ran the sessions remotely on Teams, so the participants were talking to us in front of their computers with the tactile prototype in front of them. For each of the 4 screens, we went through the same process. So we'd describe a scenario, and then we would use the audio description and step through the page. Once we'd clarified any questions about that, we'd then ask the participant how they would complete tasks and ask them open-ended questions about the page. These questions were designed to get an understanding of the usability and functionality of the page, as well as how the experience could be enhanced for screen reader users and how it could be translated into an optimal accessible structure. And then after we'd gone through each of the 4 screens, we asked some open-ended questions to try and understand the experience of this type of testing for our participants. So we learned some insights about the search design. Firstly, we learned that some of the content on the page, such as special deals and quick links, would likely be missed by someone using a screen reader in its current design. We learned that the number of search results being shown was important, and in this design, it wasn't being done. Several of the participants mentioned Google, and the importance of using that as a standard for search was reinforced to us. And lastly, we clarified some conventions on coding for filters, pagination, and some of the other elements on the page. Taken together, this is exactly the type of insights that we would hope to get from prototype testing early in a design process. And we're going to take all of this feedback and iterate the designs and improve the search, and then we'll come back and we'll test again. We also got feedback from the participants and the designers on how they found the experience. So the designer said, "Fascinating session, and thanks very much for your valuable insights. It's been great. The raised line diagrams allowed the participants to give feedback on our web prototypes without having to use a screen reader. They've also already started taking some of the insights from the test sessions and started to make changes to the designs." The participant, this is a quote from one of them. I've never really seen web pages in this kind of form before, so it's quite eye-opening just to see how things are laid out, rather than just sort of have a linear type list-like information experience. It's been interesting. And this participant has also said they would be interested in participating in this type of research again in the future.
So here's what we learnt from this new type of methodology and how we can refine it. It's best to be transparent with recruitment. Find people who have an interest in tactile diagrams and what makes a diagram effective versus, what makes a diagram difficult to interpret and understand. Use the expertise of an accessibility SME to assist in moderating the sessions if you have someone available. They will be familiar with how user interface components are announced by a screen reader and what keywords will resonate with participants. Simplify the diagram down and remove components that aren't important, like the global navigation if you're actually testing the search. Make sure that the textures are clearly differentiated from each other and that components have adequate spacing. Add meaningful labels in Braille and in text. The text will help the moderator and observers follow along, and allow enough time. The diagrams can take longer than you might expect to describe, especially when they're described well.
So as well as refining this particular methodology, some of our other steps. We're going to test this search prototype with more participants to really validate the findings that we've got. We'll then iterate based on that feedback, and we'll come back and we'll test again. We'd also like to investigate using different types of prototypes, including with simulated screen reader announcements. And then lastly, we're looking to assign textures to different types of elements in our design system, and this will help us create prototypes more quickly for future projects. So, thank you for listening to our talk. I hope you found it interesting and useful.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the Q&A.
Bye.
Bye.
AliCamp 2021.